We kind of had this comeback story, this resurgence, and we've got the right team to execute on the vision we want to, and these next couple months are really when you're going to start to see it. So,
welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic from 4RC. Today's episode spotlights Wormhole, a leading interoperability platform that powers bridges and multi-chain DeFi applications on over 30 blockchain networks. In this episode, we interview Wormhole co-founder Robinson Burkey about the role Wormhole is playing in the future of interoperable DeFi, how they're helping solve for liquidity fragmentation, and how they plan to further scale the protocol while remaining secure and decentralized. But before we do, just a quick word from our sponsors who make the Edge Podcast possible. Introducing RSWETH by SWELL Network, a native liquid restaking token that gives you access to the Eigenlayer ecosystem. Earn pearls, points, and future restaking rewards without locking your liquidity. And enjoy countless DeFi integrations for earning easy passive yield. Learn more at swellnetwork.io.
Introducing the MANTLE liquid staking protocol, MANTLE LSP, a permissionless, non-custodial ETH liquid staking protocol deployed on Ethereum L1 and governed by MANTLE. With MANTLE LSP, users can stake ETH to instantly receive METH, earn yield and accumulate rewards the longer you stake. METH is the value accumulating receipt token that will give you access to expanded yield opportunities. Stake and watch your yield grow with MANTLE LSP.
Introducing KELP DAO, the first liquid restaking platform for LSTs. With KELP, anyone can deposit STETH by Lido, ETHX by Stater, or SFRX ETH by Frax, and mint a liquid restaking token called RSETH. With RSETH, you can participate in your favorite DeFi platforms and get 100% of all Eigenlayer points plus KELP miles. A fresh wave of restaking is here, restaking that's liquid, rewarding, and convenient. Learn more today at kelpdao.xyz/restake. For most of us, our crypto journey started with MetaMask, and now with MetaMask Portfolio, we can do so much more. MetaMask Portfolio puts you in control. Use the dashboard to see all your assets and balances across your wallets in one place. The buy feature allows us to buy crypto assets effortlessly with fiat options such as PayPal or credit card. The swap feature allows us to swap any tokens anytime by finding a selection of available rates. The bridge feature allows us to bridge between networks including Ethereum, L1s, and L2s based on the best price and fastest delivery time. And with the stake feature, anyone in a few clicks can stake ETH and earn rewards. Do more in Web3 your way with a safe, simple, and convenient tool that's all in one place. Track and manage your Web3 everything at metamask.io/portfolio.
It all started so simply with CryptoKitties and Maker on Ethereum, but quickly became complex with more applications and many chains. Today, everyone agrees UX issues are the biggest blocker standing in the way of crypto adoption. Introducing AVOCADO. Multi-chain UX redesigned from the ground up. The first wallet to abstract networks, accounts, and gas. One gas tank to pay transaction fees on all chains. In USDC, and native access to INSTADAPP's powerful, custom DeFi strategies. AVOCADO, one wallet to rule all chains.
Let's introduce Robinson Burkey, the Wormhole Foundation co-founder. Robinson, welcome to the Edge Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I've been a fan for a little while, and I'm excited I could finally come on and contribute to what you guys are doing.
We appreciate you joining us. Nomadic and I were talking with you just before this about the fact that I think we've been using Portal or Wormhole since about 2021 when you launched, and it's mind-blowing, like just how far you've all come. We're going to talk a little bit today about the fact that the Wormhole Foundation was launched, or at least announced, I guess, in August 2023. The Portal Bridge, which is what most folks, I'm assuming, are most familiar with, supports something like 30 plus networks, L1s and L2s, EVM and non-EVM in terms of bridging. And we're going to talk a little bit more then also about, the fact that Wormhole is not just a token bridging protocol. There's a bit more there to understand under the hood. So I'm gonna let you tell more of that story, but could you start out with a little bit more about, the background I alluded to here? Like, what else have you worked on? And I guess what led you to start working on Wormhole?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been working on startups or working within the startup world, I guess you can say, for the better part of a decade. Always been really drawn to growing products I felt were making some sort of meaningful impact. Did that for a while at a small text messaging AI startup before AI was cool. This was, years ago. Maybe it was the first AI renaissance. I don't know. This one's obviously much bigger. But did that for a while. Ended up joining the DoorDash team right after it switched from being actually called Palo Alto Delivery Company, funny enough, to being called DoorDash. Helped within their new verticals part of the business. So essentially anything that wasn't, any of us right here ordering a burrito to your door, we would work on businesses outside of that. So how do we take that business and apply it to other things? For instance, ordering large catering orders for businesses or pharmaceutical sales reps, giving them like a way to order food, etc. So worked on a lot of different products there. I actually ended up mining Ethereum. That was kind of my gateway drug into crypto, if you will, back in 2017. At the time, I was still at DoorDash. After we went public, I was looked around. I said, what did I feel like was kind of like a meaningful infrastructure that was going on within the space? And the concept of interoperability, which I know we'll talk about a good bit today, was something I was interested in, right? Like, how do we get all these different systems to talk to one another? So ended up looking around, and Polkadot actually stuck out to me. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's this app chain network, all these different blockchains that out of the box, if you will, could speak to each other, can send data, etc. So got fascinated in that, worked in that ecosystem for a bit, got my feet wet, and ultimately ended up kind of coming onto the DoorDash squad, if you will. And the history there is, I think, pretty interesting. Wormhole, mixing the two up, was born out of kind of this need in almost probably pre-DeFi summer, around DeFi summer. The original need was to connect Solana and Ethereum. And actually, it was a hackathon project, and, Tolly or Solana Foundation, keep me honest, I think it was the first Solana hackathon project, and the team at the time had won it. And so, which was really cool. And the idea was like, how do we connect Solana and Ethereum? So that's like the original idea, and where things came from. And then shortly after that, I think Jump, who is a big player in the space, realized what this could be, right? I think connecting blockchains is kind of core infrastructure. And so they took it on, they incubated it. And that's where I kind of came along to help make this into a product, a company, something that can scale and ultimately kind of connect all blockchains. And that's closer where we are today. The plan has kind of thankfully panned out.
I actually see a lot of parallels to what you did at DoorDash, and then Axelar, and then Wormhole. Like, I feel like that progression makes a lot of sense. Like, at DoorDash, you're really just like opening up food liquidity for people and, finding new transactions and routing food to people to their doors. I think we should start out just like, what is the elevator pitch for Wormhole? Like, how do you describe Wormhole to somebody today?
Yeah. So you'll hear this word interoperability. And I think the best way to think about Wormhole is through this lens. And, we like to draw a lot of analogies to mental models here in this space because it's a lot of new technology that can be helpful. But interoperability is nothing new, right? It's this concept of having two different systems work together at a very high level. An example could be, cloud servers, AWS. They need their different cloud servers, different systems to communicate with one another. Another example could be Swift. Swift is a popular banking system, right? It's it's a system. So what happens is you'll have banks. These banks don't talk to each other, and SWIFT essentially provides the communication between these banks. You've probably, have a SWIFT number or worked with your bank on something like that. Now, Wormhole kind of takes this same methodology, the same idea, and applies it to blockchains. Blockchains do not talk with one another, right? So Ethereum is its own insulated sovereign system and is set up in a way that doesn't work with Solana. I almost sometimes also think about it as like this translation layer. So what Wormhole is doing at the very core of the technology is connecting blockchains and helping them speak. It's translating for one another. A lot of people will say you're sharing state. So you're saying what happens on this chain, and then you can then send it to this chain, so it's recorded as well. And so what you can do when you have this very base level infrastructure is you can build a lot of things on top of it. And so kind of the pitch now, if you will, for Wormhole is that we are an interoperability protocol connecting 30 plus blockchains, enabling applications to build multi-chain or bridges to be a thing.
Robinson, I'm curious then, who do you see as your competitors? Because there's so much that you do, and I think the names that were most top of mind for me are Layer 0 and Socket. But if you can answer more about who do you guys see as your most direct competitors?
So I like to think about this in layers, and I've kind of dubbed it the interoperability stack, if you will, just to help people conceptualize it. So at the base layer, this bottom, you have messaging protocols. You can call them interoperability protocols, but it's what I just mentioned, right? It's the ability to share state between chains in some secure way. All messaging providers have a different way that they deem secure. So at that base level, to answer your question more specifically, you typically have Axelar, Wormhole, and Layer 0. That's kind of somewhat of the consolidation we're seeing around messaging providers or interoperability protocols. What you have on top of that is what I would call the token bridge or liquidity layer. And so this would be things like, and Wormhole's pretty famous for this. This would be things like Portal, right? I think people oftentimes group the two in because if you're a user, the thing that's really easy for you to conceptualize is sending ETH from Ethereum to Solana, right? You're using it, you know what a bridge is. It's much easier to conceptualize. And so that layer, is the first layer that the user interacts with. It's that token bridge liquidity layer. Another example is something like a Mayan Finance, an All Bridge, any of these token bridges that you maybe have used would be that second layer. And then the third one is now answering your, the other part of your question is what I would call the aggregation layer. So that's Socket, that's Li-Fi, that is, I believe Bungie is another one. And what they're doing is they're essentially kind of grouping these in together and exposing the best routes to the user, right? So let's say Wormhole has Solana to Ethereum, Axelar has these two Cosmos chains, and they can kind of combine it and expose the best option for the user. And then the last one is application. So you put all that and package it to a wallet. So longer answer that you're probably looking for, but I think it's a good kind of pyramid to think about this.
No, I love that answer. So, okay, you kind of ended off at the application layer and kind of getting back to interoperability. Can you walk us through kind of an example how interoperability advances an application? How does Wormhole impact other applications and I guess make them even more usable or functionable for the end user?
So the first example that wouldn't be possible without something like Wormhole, we've already talked about it, but I'll just cover off on it again, is token bridging or NFT bridging, right? During the bull market, we actually, funny enough, Portal's completely permissionless, by the way, meaning anyone can come and use it. We had people sending punks through Portal. They were sending Bored Apes. It was crazy time. There was even a Twitter account that was, I think it was called something like 50 punks on Solana. And someone had 50 punks and they were sending them to Solana. Anyway, NFT bridging, token bridging is not possible without that like bottom layer, the wormhole assistance. But what we think is really interesting is that token bridging has product market fit today. And where we've seen a lot of success is in some of these other applications where Wormhole kind of falls to the background. I'll give a few categories. The first one I would say is oracles. So most people are familiar with Chainlink. There's another Oracle provider called Pith. It's pretty up and coming. They actually just launched a token, I believe. I think more people are familiar with them now. But Pith, essentially what they do is they work with financial firms. So they work with the Jane Streets of the world, these hedge funds that have really good access to high quality data. So they'll essentially work with those data providers, they call them, and they will broadcast that data on chain. And then what Pith does is they use that data to then provide Oracle price feeds. When we approached Pith, they had 90% of the TVL, or the thing they call TVS. It's essentially how many price feeds they're providing. They had 90% of the Solana ecosystem on lock. And so when we started working with Pith, we said, you have a really good model here. You have low latency, high fidelity data, really good for like high frequency DeFi, like the best of the best. And so when we approached them, we said, you can work with Wormhole. We can be the messaging provider to pick up that data feed and send it cross chain. And so the alternative, just so like people understand, is that Pith more or less rebuilt their infrastructure. First of all, it's on Solana, so they have to rebuild it, for an EVM. And then, even if they did rebuild it for an EVM, they'd also have to deploy it on all these different chains. What comes with all of that as well is not only time and resources, but it's audits. You have to audit all those deployments. So when we approached Pith, we said, hey, we're already across all these chains. This is what we do. Like, this is the service we provide. Use our messaging layer and, reached all these chains. And I wish I could show you all the graph, but I think Pith is now on 45 chains, something like that. And it is all largely because of Wormhole, and Pith's obviously a great product. So it sells itself. But I think that to me is one of the, really, really interesting use cases where Wormhole comes along as like this business grower almost, for like lack of better rhetoric. And I think that's one. The other ones I would think about that are like largely in production today is a lot of things that happen under the hood. So Uniswap, I think, is a really good example. So most people are familiar with Uniswap, but if you aren't, it's the largest decentralized exchange. Uniswap has lots of deployments across a number of different blockchains. Now, the problem that presents itself is that all of the like governance logic. So if I'm a token holder and I want to vote on, the fee that someone may be charged for using Uniswap, and let's just say that in the most simplest way, you have to do that on Ethereum. But if you have all these deployments on all these other chains, and those users are on those other chains, but they hold Uni, how are they voting, right? And so at its simplest form, what Wormhole does here is that, let's say that voting happens on Ethereum, we're able to broadcast the outcome of that vote to all these different chains so that those chains can update. And we're able to do that in like obviously a decentralized way. And now a lot of that is like happening under the hood, which is also something that's interesting, is that like if we're doing a good job, we're falling to the background, right? And these applications can be more multi-chain without us, users having to send assets cross-chain and figure out what chain they're on, et cetera. So happy to go into more, but those are, I think, two additional non kind of token use cases that are live and in production today.
Honestly, like I think I just learned so much about Wormhole that I didn't know right there. That Pith example really drove it home. Like that is like the ultimate win-win scenario there. And I mean, I don't know what you charge Pith for that service. I would assume it's a fair amount, but it just makes total sense that you can kind of be that like vessel that expands them. Like you've kind of done that hard legwork of connecting underneath the hood, and they just kind of use your infrastructure to expand what they do other places, which is really cool, really fascinating. So this is exactly what I wanted to learn about, because like, as we talked about before, like, I think I was still approaching Wormhole as a token bridge and was clearly missing kind of like what you alluded to, you do under the hood and is maybe less seen or people are maybe not aware of. One other thing I'm thinking of, like, if I'm having a podcast talking about like messaging protocols, I can already see like the Link Marines up in my Twitter DMs, just like hammering me for not bringing up Chainlink and CCIP. Could you just maybe talk about how you differ, how you're similar? I know they're maybe a little bit more in the infancy of launching CCIP, but like, what do you see there? Is that something that you're paying attention to? Or yeah, if you can speak to that at all, that'd be great.
Yeah, look, I think Chainlink is in a unique position because, well, speaking on CCIP for a second, you know, I think they're definitely becoming part of the bridge game. A lot of the, I think, decisions for developers are going to come down to trade-offs when education will be important here. One of those trade-offs is security, right? Like how does this bridge function? You know, how many people need to come to consensus on anything, or how many people will take to you know, rug the whole bridge, right? So I believe the latest on Chainlink's model, and the Link Marines will probably come after me for this as well, but I think it's somewhat of like a 5-party multisig or something like that. So the developer will have to understand, number one is like, is this something, you know, they're comfortable with? The thing I think Chainlink, you know, has going for them is this kind of like leverage, right? Like they charge a pretty hefty price for a lot of these Oracle price feeds, you know, and you're able to say like, hey, we charge for this. We could take some money off here if you use this, right? So I think when I think about go to market, that's one thing I think about, right? So I think there's a good opportunity there. But when it comes to like Wormhole and how we kind of see the competition here, like for sure, you know, CCIP is Chainlink, I would say, is formidable. But for us, all we're focused on is messaging, being that interoperability provider. That is all we're focused on, and we want teams to build on top of us, and just almost like the mental model of an L1, if you will. Like, oh, we're gonna focus on our blockchain, and we want teams to come build on top of us, and we're just gonna focus on this. Say with us. Now, I think when you think about like any go-to-market, when you add in products, you add in split focuses, etc., I view that as a strength for us, right? Like we have one core focus, and it's to expand this. And so, you know, I'm not going to necessarily down talk any competitors or anything like that, but I think we feel really good about our position, especially as it's late. And yeah, I mean that's my like high level take on CCIP and Chainlink.
Robinson, totally separate from CCIP, there's CCTP. So this refers to, for folks that aren't aware of this, it's Circle, as in like the stablecoin issuer, Circle's cross-chain transfer protocol. Can you talk about the significance of Wormhole Connect and how it powers the USDC CCTP?
Absolutely. Another thing we love in the space is our acronyms. But yeah, so CCTP is a really interesting story to me, just at a high level. Our team also, like Wormhole contributors, helps you know, Circle kind of design some of the early designs there as well. What happened with Circle is that they kind of came to market, right? And they were probably the first, or one of the first really popular stable coins. And they realized something when they started going cross-chain, is that liquidity fragmentation is a real thing, right? And we actually were privileged to launch a number of blockchains, because usually bridges are there as kind of a day one partner to make sure users can get over and liquidity can get over, etc. So we've been lucky to launch a lot of chains, and we've seen a lot of things happen on these different launches. And one of the things that, you know, happens when you have you don't have like a single, let's say, provider or bridge for a token, is you can have liquidity fragmentation. And the thing that happened with Circle is that they natively deployed this USDC on all these different blockchains. So what that means is that there are all these different versions of USDC, And maybe to familiarize it with some people, you've probably seen USDC.ET. You've probably seen USDC maybe .ARB, USDC.SOL or so. I always forget which one it is. Anyway, whichever chain they're native to, that's like how you signify where it comes from, is the easiest way to think about that. So what happens is that if, let's say, a new chain launches, let's just say we're going back to when Aptos launches. Aptos needs USDC, but USDC is not going to be there day one. What Circle will do is they'll wait, let a chain launch, see how it does, see what traction it gets, then decide to allocate resources and deploy native USDC. So what happens is you have all this USDC bridged over, and you end up with liquidity fragmentation. You end up with USDC.ET, .SOL, .BNB, etc. And so Circle, kind of learned the hard way when it comes to their go-to-market that, we need to figure out a solution to this problem. It's not good for us. So that's kind of where CCTP was born. So in essence, when you think about CCTP, it is a message passing protocol. It is, some people call it a bridge. It is an interoperability protocol. What is happening under the hood is that Circle is the one signer, so it's completely centralized, but they are the one entity that's able to burn and then mint USDC on the other chain. And what you effectively do here is you eliminate liquidity fragmentation, because we're in ETH land here and we're in Solana land here. I've got USDC that's native to Ethereum. I'm going to burn that, and I'm just going to remint USDC that's native to Solana. And so you effectively do away with the problem. Now, for Wormhole, you could view this as a little bit of competition, but we actually, very much so leaned into this more than viewing it that way. And it's panned out to be a very kind of symbiotic relationship, I would say. So for us, where Wormhole comes in here is we are kind of an extra set of instructions to compose these really unique transactions. So what do I mean by that? If you want to send USDC from ETH to Solana, that's great. You could send it. But what if in an application you could not, you're not sending it anymore. You're just depositing it into a lending market with Solana and you're on Ethereum. What's happening is you're using CCTP and then you're using Wormhole, this extra set of instructions to say, once you get here, also, you've already been approved by the user to also do this. So you could do things like send and swap, send and lend, send and pay, just plus whatever action. And that's where Wormhole comes in. So it's been really cool to see, because once we're able to do that, once we're able to use CCTP as part of our infrastructure, if you will, we're able to give a lot of really compelling token use cases, mainly to users.
Robinson, if we use the CCTP design as an example, then where's the downside to this? Or can you help to call out where some of the risks might be here? Because there's always a give and take here. So I'm all there for the value that we get out of the mint and burn model. I'm really excited to be able to use that, because especially as a US citizen, USDC is undoubtedly one of my favorite stable coins to use. It's the one that I use most often, I think, between Solana and Ethereum L2s. But yeah, just wondering what sorts of risks might we consider to this model?
Yeah, I think specifically to USDC and CCTP, if you are someone that trusts USDC, right? We know it's this, it's a centralized solution, right? And we've all come to terms with that. It seems like a lot of us have accepted that. If you accept that, then look, I would say it's fair for you to accept the trust assumptions of CCTP. Trust assumptions meaning whenever you use something, you ask yourself, who am I trusting here? The answer is you're trusting Circle. And then the other thing is contracts, right? You want to make sure that, and this is something, users shouldn't have to make sure of, but, make sure that the contracts Circle is using to burn and mint have been audited, etc. Now, Circle is pretty trusted. So you can make the safe assumption to say, I use USDC. Circle's been around for a long time. I trust that they have audited these contracts. I trust them as a centralized entity. I feel comfortable using CCTP. I see that line of logic being very acceptable. But yeah, that's how I would view it in a nutshell.
DeFi enables a whole new world of trading and yield opportunities. Sometimes we all wish we had a little bit bigger of a budget so we can make the most out of it. That's why we created Blueberry. Blueberry lets you access the best opportunities on Ethereum all in one easy-to-use terminal. You can access 5x, 10x, or even 20x your money in one click, more than any other lending market, so you can maximize your earnings. Only on Blueberry.
Maverick Protocol provides innovative liquidity solutions for token projects to customize, automate, and incentivize their liquidity with the highest efficiency in DeFi, all powered by Maverick AMM. Why has Maverick become the first choice for all kinds of token projects from stablecoins to LRTs? As the first dynamic distribution AMM, Maverick AMM provides automated liquidity movement modes which move your liquidity to follow price, keeping it where it does the most good. This enables Maverick-powered pools to process higher volume with lower TVL requirements and means that Maverick supports the highest capital efficiency for LRTs like WEETH. Maverick AMM also supports non-uniform liquidity distributions, making it easy to concentrate liquidity in shapes that fit each project's individual needs. Finally, Maverick boosted positions maximize incentive efficiency for protocols looking to bootstrap their token liquidity to precise strategic areas of a liquidity pool. Token communities like Lido, Aave, SWELL, EtherFi, and KELP DAO have been bootstrapping TVL and maintaining PEG using Maverick tools. Ready to build liquidity with maximal efficiency? Go to app.mav.xyz/The Edge Podcast today. I want to get back to that liquidity fragmentation because if you're in the space, you're just seeing we're in this like 1,000 roll-up future now that we're hurtling towards. And just like one of my worries, and probably one of many people's worries, is this added liquidity fragmentation and complexity of getting between roll-ups that you want to be on. So like, is Wormhole working towards solutions for that problem as well? Anything you can expand upon there?
Yeah, this is a really good question because I feel like we got really excited as an industry on how to scale Ethereum and then didn't think about didn't necessarily think about what would be needed for these roll-ups to be successful. The thing I'll caveat here is that a lot of roll-ups, may just be application specific. So what I mean by that is they may serve one purpose, right? And I think there can be a need for that in and of itself. But a lot of roll-ups today, at least the market we're seeing, is they're competing for the sun, right? They want to be a general purpose roll-up with this twist, etc. And if we think about what it takes for a roll-up to be successful, there's a lot of infrastructure that's involved. Like take away the building a company, the tokenomics, everything that comes with that, but focus on if you're a chain, focus on actually if you're a user using a chain, what do you want to see there? And what you want to see is you probably want some form of USDC, since we're on the topic. You probably have liquidity on another chain and you're going to want to bridge that over. So they're going to need a bridge provider. Maybe they want two. You're going to want to use DeFi. So they're going to need an Oracle. So, they're going to need Oracle infrastructure. And the list kind of goes on, like RPCs, et cetera. And what I mean, why I say that is because, I want to call out that I do sometimes have concerns about how fast the roll-ups are growing. And I feel like sometimes they're outgrowing some of the infrastructure, if you will, right? And the way I think about this is that there's no free lunch, in economics, and there's no free lunch in crypto. If something usually scales too fast, it's usually because you're accepting a trade-off. And most of the time, that trade-off is because it's largely maybe a centralized solution, or it's, maybe not well audited, et cetera, right? Like, if something is again scaling so fast, there's some trade-off you're giving up here. So I know that's a little bit doom and gloom. So I do think there's a few potential solutions, but in general, my kind of high-level thesis is that I think that some of these at some point, we have to start thinking about the infrastructure that some of these roll-ups will have, and if we can scale to meet at least the builders' demand to build roll-ups. If we can scale in a decentralized and secure way from an infrastructure perspective to meet that, right? Like Wormhole to scale to new chains, while we can do it fairly quickly, we can't, it's not like we can onboard 10 in a couple month span. So anyway, I think there's challenges ahead, but I think there's a few different things that can help. I think the first one is, aggregation of interoperability, which I think is an interesting concept. So Wormhole, for instance, we use IBC, right? We don't want to compete with Cosmos and try and compete with IBC. They have a good solution there. So we actually use IBC when we're in the Cosmos ecosystem. And what we did instead is we set up a router chain. So Wormhole actually built its own Cosmos blockchain. It's called Wormhole Gateway. Not a lot of people know this, but we connect the Guardian network, which is like our validator network. We connect to that router chain. Then we use IBC to connect to all these chains because it's a lot quicker. They've already figured out kind of how to scale within Cosmos. And we do the same exact thing in the Polkadot system. So we connect to one chain there. There we connect to Moonbeam. And then we use XCM to get to all these other chains. And so the picture I'm painting here is that I see a world where, there's this kind of aggregation of the interop stack is what I'll call it. And how you expose that to the user can be in a different forms, right? It could be via Portal, right? If you go on Portal, you can bridge from ETH to Osmosis or Ethereum to Osmosis, and you're going through Gateway and using IBC, all this stuff in the background. So I think that is a solid path. And what that could look like for Ethereum is connecting to mainnet and eventually using the native bridges, right? We'll still have to figure out how to connect it between the L2s, which is another thing. But I'll stop just with the first one and say the aggregation of the interop stack, I think, is an interesting space. And we've already started to explore it. I'll continue to. And then the last thing is, and this speaks more to your point around liquidity fragmentation, nomadic, is this adoption of standards. So I think we're seeing a race to own the standard, which is really interesting, right? And what I mean by that is, who is owning the contracts that mint the assets that who's providing the rails for those assets and who's owning those contracts. And I think we've seen some of the stuff recently in some of these governance votes with Lido, which is a good case in point. But this consolidation around standards, I think will need to happen. And why we're seeing so much buzz and heat around this is because other providers in the space know this. It's there will be, it behooves the industry for, I guess, we'll continue to see a proliferation of chains, let's say, but in that world, we need to see a consolidation of interop protocols for things to work really well, in my opinion.
Okay, so at this point in the podcast, if someone's just learning about Wormhole, and I think more of the comprehensive vision that you've laid out, beyond what we knew through just the portal bridging, I think the next few questions are always, what about security? What about decentralization? So maybe security should be the next thing we touch on. What are you all doing in order to ensure that this protocol is secure? And if you wouldn't mind also just giving maybe the highlights reel of the history of the Wormhole exploit. This is going all the way back to February 2022. So we're 2 years out from this now, but I think it's helpful history to be aware of. And also too, the outcome of that and just where we are today in terms of security.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is actually the most important thing when it comes to interoperability. And taking a quick step back, the way I think about all interoperability, not just Wormhole, but of course I think about Wormhole in this way, is it is almost like a public utility. The more the space matures, the less you will be using an interoperability protocol. We are doing a good job if you're a user using an application and you actually don't know that Wormhole facilitated something in the background. And if we take on that responsibility, security needs to be, one of the most important things, if not the most important thing we do. So you brought up, the exploit going on 2 years. Definitely an unfortunate event. Users were made whole the next day. We were fortunate to have a large investor at the time, Chump, that was able to come in and do that. But I think, we're now at a point where we're much stronger for it. A lot of people will use the term battle tested, if you will. And the testament to that is everything we've done since then. And I like to think it's a bit of a comeback story, but maybe, I'm biased. The security at Wormhole has been the number one focus. So for, I guess, some quick context, following the incident, we brought on the CISO from Mozilla Firefox. That individual built out an entire internal security team. That team wasn't just focused on audits, which is kind of like retroactive almost. If you, I guess you're being proactive in a sense, but it's a little bit of like a box checking security exercise. The team was focused on proactive security. And so before I go into the proactive stuff, to give everyone listening like an idea of how Wormhole works, we talked a little bit about this idea of sharing data between blockchains, shared state, a lot of people will call it. You need to have at least one kind of or decentralized network to say what is true. And this is the case for most protocols. And so Wormhole uses what's called a proof of authority consensus. So we have 19 guardians. Fun fact, guardians is just a branded name for validators. So we have 19 entities, and these are some of the more reputable validator companies in the space. You've got P2P, Chorus One, Figment. These are all guardians for Wormhole. And what happens is that 13 out of 19 of them need to come to consensus on every single message that goes through Wormhole. So you would need essentially 13 separate companies to collude to take down, or to falsify a message through Wormhole. So that being said, with that as the backdrop, we do that across 30 plus chains. So there's a lot of surface area to cover when it comes to security, especially around smart contracts and things like that. So the security team we brought on has been entirely focused on proactive security. And the question we oftentimes get asked is like, Web3 security, like what's going on? There's been a lot of hacks, etc. Yes, this is true. We all know this is true. Two main reasons. Number one is a lot of things are transparent. A lot of things are on chain. A lot of things are open source. And so, it's much easier to hack and it's much easier to see when there have been hacks. But the second thing is that there's actually no silver bullet answer to the question. It's adopting like the boring tried and true principles from Web 2 that we're working on. So the base concept that we're focused on and have been focused on is what you'll hear. I think you'll start to hear this more now, is defense in depth security. All that means is like, let's say you have the protocol here. You have one layer of defense, 2 layers of defense, 3 layers of defense. And the idea is that you have to get through every single layer to get to some sort of vulnerability. And so for us, I won't go too deep into the technicals, but we've built out 2, I would say industry leading, but entirely separate security features that layer on, they add 2 layers to Wormhole so that you would have to, in theory, right, you'd have to get through these layers to get at any. And then the last thing I would say is, we don't have to go too deep into this, but ZK bridging is a real thing. And the simplest way I explain this is we've talked about the guardians, right? We talked about these, very known entities that have to attest to every message that goes through Wormhole. With ZK, which are those are entities, right? You're trusting humans, or in this case entities, but humans. With ZK, the idea at a very high level is that you're trusting math, right? So if we view trust on a spectrum, I talked a little bit about when you use an application, you ask yourself, who am I trusting in this scenario? We view trust on a spectrum being trusting one person, maybe it's pretty risky, right? Going to this idea of where you're trusting math is a good thing. It means that we're, in essence, more secure, more decentralized. So we've been investing a lot in ZK bridging in combination with defense and depth. I'd say it's a short answer. So hopefully that answers some of the security related questions, but definitely, top of mind and number one focus for us here at Wormhole Foundation.
One thing I'm slightly confused on is like proof of stake equivalent to what you're doing with Wormhole Guardians, or is it slightly different? Does a token play any role in this in the future?
It's a great question. And I think Wormhole's it's a different model than I think a lot of people understand kind of the proof of stake tokenomics model, and Wormhole as a protocol is different, and it's hard to kind of wrap your head around. The short answer is that we definitely are going to be decentralizing. So we want to incentivize the guardians longer term with some sort of mechanism, right? Some sort of token incentivization, if you will, to make sure that they're doing the right thing for the network and are also incentivized long term. I think another thing we also want to do is we actually want to put the power in the token holders' hands, right? So the short answer is yes. We are going to be rolling out a model that would incentivize the guardians, but the other answer is no, it won't be anything purchasing.
While we're kind of talking about the token there, do you have any idea like what sort of like utility that token will have? And I mean, looking at some of our shows, anytime we mention airdrop or bull run, we always get a lot of listens or views. So I'm going to ask too, is there anything you can tell listeners about a potential airdrop? And feel free to, if you can't, that's fine.
Hey folks, we're going to take a quick 60-second break from the interview because when we recorded this podcast, it was days before the Wormhole tokenomics was announced on February 7th. So I'm going to give you a very quick rundown of all you need to know. So first off, the utility behind this token is mainly outlined as governance. And so the article that we've linked in our show notes, it'll walk through all of the examples they give here, like adding and removing blockchain connections to Wormhole, upgrading smart contracts, adjusting fees, expanding or adding new parties to the Guardian set, adjusting rate limits, and then making any adjustments to the token utility and design. Then the second most important set of detail is around the token distribution and its release schedule. So there will be a max supply of 10 billion Wormhole tokens. The ticker is just a single letter, it's W. There will be an initial circulating supply of 1.8 billion. The token is going to be both a Solana SPL token and a native ERC20 token. Also, it's important to note that 82% of the Wormhole token will be initially locked, and those tokens will unlock over the course of 4 years per this token release schedule. Again, I would recommend, if you're listening to the podcast, just go to the show notes and look up the blog post at wormhole.com. Lastly, in terms of the token allocation, 17% of the token supply will be allocated to the community and the launch of the token. Given that 17% allocation, you can also look forward to 11% of the allocation will be unlocked upon the token generation event. The snapshot for this airdrop has already been taken according to the blog post. That's 1.1 billion Wormhole tokens then will be unlocked upon the TGE, and the remaining 6% will be unlocked 4 months after the TGE in accordance with the token release schedule that's outlined in the blog post. So that's all for now, and we'll get right back to the interview.
The one thing I can say is that, we are prioritizing decentralizing the protocol. There are, even in the span of this conversation, there's a number of other products Wormhole has that, can be, I guess you could say, monetized in a way to make the protocol sustainable in the long term. I'll give you an example. One thing we have is called Wormhole queries. A very, very simple mental model for this is an on-chain API call. So oracles take an aggregate of the world off-chain, bring it on-chain, and then, send it cross-chain, if you will, like Pit. What we do is we say, hey, this person on ETH has a crypto pump. I need to verify. I have a game on Solana. I need to verify that they have a pump before I let them in my game on Solana. Right. And so this idea of an API call, I'm just giving one example, is definitely something that we could add into a tokenomics model in the future. But at this time, there's nothing we can share publicly, but stay tuned.
One other thing I want to bring up, I admittedly don't know a ton about this, but I saw some chatter over crypto Twitter regarding Lido and their Steth bridge. And it was to do with, I think, Layer 0 got fairly presumptuous and just assumed that they were going to handle everything. And then, as it turns out, it looks like Wormhole and Axelar have teamed up to supply that service. Again, don't know much, but what happened there? And then maybe how are you working with Axelar on that? That seems like a cool partnership as well.
Yeah, that was a couple of month-long saga, and definitely, I think, quite the story for those that were involved. But yeah, I think that I'll try to be somewhat brief about this. But Layer 0 had made certain claims around being an official bridge for RSWETH at BNB. And I think the community's response was frustration, and specifically frustration around, asking the question, if this is the official bridge, then what's the point of having governance, right? If we can't decide, right? I'm the token holder. I can't decide what, we dub as like, this is the canonical standard. This is what we are comfortable with users using for, the protocol that we own. And so what had happened was the community obviously reacted in that way. They say, you took this decision from us. That's like very, very short version. The other side of the argument, I think it's always important to shed light on both, is the permissionless camp. And that went a little bit like, well, isn't the idea that this should be permissionless? And I think both are right to an extent. I think where the line is drawn is that you could absolutely bridge Lido, RSWETH today support, right? Before this vote went through. But I think the line that's drawn is when you kind of claim something as the canonical standard or the official. It was almost inferring like this was voted on, like this is what came in through government. So what ended up happening is this kind of kicked off this huge effort, or I would almost view it as like an RFP, like this request for a proposal on who's going to be this infrastructure provider for Ethereum to BNB, which is funny because it's like one corridor, months of work went into this, but that's another discussion around governance. And what happened was, I think there was a lot of compelling proposals put forward, but I think Wormhole and Axelar put their money where their mouth was, or like put actions over words when we said, we heard what the community wanted, and they wanted a messaging agnostic. So what that means is like, this contract can only use Wormhole messaging, right? So let's say we burn and we mint, or we lock and we mint, it can only use Wormhole messaging. They view that as like vendor lock-in, which could be true, right? So we were like, hey, we heard this. We listened to all the feedback. We actually had a lot of calls. And like I said, I think we put our money where our mouth is when we said, I want to work with a competitor, because that is ultimately what the community is asking for. They want a bridge agnostic solution. So essentially what's happening under the hood is that you're using Wormhole and Axelar, and then in order to mint RSWETH on the next chain, you need both of the message attestations to come through. And then you're able to mint RSWETH. And the last thing it did is the contract will also get moved to Lido governance. So we will own, or when I say we, the Wormhole Foundation, Axelar Foundation will own the contract. Lido DAO will. And so this vote was important. And I think this is where some people are like, it's just RSWETH or BNB. I think it was a vote around principle, right? It was this vendor using their like vendor lock-in, right? Their contract, their messaging, and saying that I'm going to skirt governance. This is going to be official. And we're going to make this happen. And what we actually saw, not from the other competitors, but from the community, was like, whoa, like, why do I even have tokens if I can't vote and make a decision on something like this, right? Like, isn't this what governance is for? So in a nutshell, I think like this whole thing it started as like a very tactical, how do we get RSWETH here, and ended with, this principle of, honestly, around decentralization, right? Because if you can skirt governance, then you can skirt decentralization, then, why do we do it?
I think the silver lining in all of this was that you have a protocol where you have builders that can still permissionlessly integrate and build around that. And for whatever reason here, the community rejected it. I think in another universe, there's a community that says, wow, like actually this is really valuable. Maybe we would have voted on this, but like because the value was so urgently needed, they just accept it and they go with it. And that's fine. Like there's actually lots of instances of this happening in DeFi, but now DeFi is becoming more mature. And I think to the point you made, I think token holders there with Lido were, wanting to have their voice heard, and that is the outcome of all of this. So I'm sure Layer Zero might do it differently if they had a chance to do it over again. But I think this was a clear demonstration of like DeFi moving in the right direction, and I'm excited for the work that you guys are doing with Axelar. But Robinson, this is probably a good place for us to start to wrap up. So I want to remind our listeners then first that they can learn more about Wormhole by going to wormhole.com. Second, I highly recommend going to learn more about the Portal Bridge, just given how popular it is and something I use as a regular DeFi user at portalbridge.com. They should follow the Wormhole Twitter account at Wormhole Crypto. They should follow you on Twitter at Robinson Burkey. All of that will be in our show notes if you need references to it. And then want to give you the final say per usual. What's the next thing we can look forward to with Wormhole? Anything else on the roadmap in the next several months, or any recommendation for how we can get involved with Wormhole?
Yeah, absolutely. More security, better user experience, more products, and more decentralization at a very high level. I think keep an eye out on our Twitter. I definitely recommend this next couple months are going to be crazy. We, like I alluded to a little bit, we kind of have this comeback story, this resurgence, and we've got the right team to execute on the vision we want to, and these next couple months are really when you're going to start to see it. So definitely stay tuned into the Twitter, and other than that, appreciate the time, and see you around.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're a talented founder or developer, please consider reaching out to our team at fourthrevolution.capital. And for future episodes of the Edge podcast, please check out our link tree at edge_pod.